Hello and welcome to Lantern Lane Stories. Tonight's story is The Boy Who Became Pablo. Once, a very small boy arrived in a town where it always felt like rain was coming. His name was Ricardo Neftalí Reyes Basualto. That is a very long name. His father worked on the railroad that cut through the forest. The forest was thick and green and dripping wet. "Welcome to Temuco," his father said quietly. His voice was deep like the rumble of train wheels. Ricardo was so small he had to look up at everything. The trees here were giants. Taller than houses, taller than clouds. They smelled like rich brown earth and old wood. Between them, he could see the silver railroad tracks the trains came through every morning. Their whistles sang a long, lonesome song. "That sound tells us we are alive," his father said. Ricardo did not understand, but he remembered those words. His mother had been a teacher who loved reading books. She was gone now, before Ricardo could know her. But her love of stories lived in the air of this family. His father did not speak about this. He was busy and serious. He wanted Ricardo to be practical and strong. Years passed, like the seasons of that wet southern forest. Ricardo grew taller, but stayed curious and quiet. He watched everything. The mist on leaves, the way water dripped for hours. He listened to everything. Birds calling in the canopy, the soft patter of endless rain. By the time Ricardo was 9 years old, something strange happened. He began to notice that regular things had colors and sounds and feelings. One afternoon, he sat by the window. The rain fell in silver threads. "The rain sounds like tiny bells," he whispered. He picked up a pencil and wrote those words down. Then he wrote more. "The forest is sleeping, but never fully. The trees dream in green." He had never planned to be a writer. But suddenly, writing felt as natural as breathing the damp air. He began filling notebooks with short poems and observations. Some were only a few lines. Some tried to capture the exact shade of gray in the sky. "Papa," he asked one evening, "what is a poet?" His father was reading the newspaper by lamplight. "A poet is someone who wastes time with words," his father said without looking up. "You should study something real. Engineering, mathematics, work that builds the world." Ricardo said nothing. But that night, he hid his notebooks under his mattress. The words would not stop coming, though. They came like the rain, constant, gentle, impossible to stop. Ricardo was 10 years old now, then 11, then 12. He still hid his poetry writing, but the notebooks filled faster and faster. He would write in the early morning before anyone woke. The town was silent except for birds. He would write during school lessons, hiding poems under his desk. He would write in the forest, sitting against the wet bark of ancient trees. His handwriting grew more confident. His words grew more daring. He began to imagine that someday maybe someone might read what he had written. But then he would remember his father's voice. "Wastes time with words." Ricardo felt torn in half. One half of him was the obedient son who would become an engineer. The other half was someone else entirely, someone wild and full of language. One day he discovered something in the newspaper that his father left on the table. There was a literary magazine called La Mañana. It printed poems and stories and articles. Real writers were published there. "Could I ever?" Ricardo whispered. The idea terrified and thrilled him equally. He thought about how his mother had been a teacher. She had loved words. She would have wanted him to be brave. When Ricardo turned 13, something shifted inside him. He was no longer small. His mind felt full of things his father could never understand. He had been reading a Czech poet named Jan Neruda. Neruda wrote with such beauty, like he could capture the exact feeling of loneliness and hope. Ricardo read those poems by candlelight, over and over. This is what words can do, Ricardo realized. They can reach into a person's heart and whisper things that are true. Then Ricardo had an idea, a brave, dangerous, secret idea. What if he published his poems under a different name? Not Ricardo Neftalí Reyes Basualto. That was the obedient son his father wanted. A new name. A name that belonged to the poet inside him. He combined the names of writers he loved. He thought of Jan Neruda and other poets whose words had moved him, and then, carefully, he wrote it down. Pablo Neruda. This is who I really am, he whispered in the dark. Pablo Neruda, not a waste of time, not impractical. A real poet with a real name. When he submitted his first poem to La Mañana newspaper, he signed it, Pablo Neruda. When it was published, the name in print looked like magic. It was him, but not him. It was the real him, the him he had been hiding, his father never knew. He did not read poetry magazines, he did not notice that this mysterious Pablo Neruda was publishing work, but Ricardo knew. The writer inside him now had a real name and a real voice. The boy had become someone new, or perhaps he had finally become himself. Years would pass in that rainy southern town. Ricardo, now Pablo in the world of words, continued to write. He published in the literary magazine Selva Austral more poems, better poems. Poems that made readers stop and think. His father eventually learned the truth. There were quiet conversations, quiet disagreements. But by then, Pablo was too real, too alive to be stopped. The boy from Temuco would grow up to become one of the world's greatest poets. He would win the greatest prize for literature. He would travel to every continent. He would write love poems and protest songs and the secrets of the human heart. But it all began here in the rain, in a small boy with a pencil and a secret. In the moment he decided to give himself a new name and claim his own truth, and so Temuco also slowly fell asleep. Good night.